beneath the city's ceaseless hum, in the labyrinthine darkness of its iron veins. Terror often finds its most captive audience. Welcome, riders of the late shift, to Nightmare True Horror. Tonight, we descend into 4 true subway horror stories, where the mundane commute derails into the unthinkable. What chilling encounters have you experienced in these subterranean passages? What faces in the crowd linger in your unease? The comments below are a station for your own disquieting journeys. If the unsettling reality of these urban nightmares resonates, consider this your transfer to subscribe. For the tales we've unearthed from the depths tonight are particularly unnerving, and the final, most shocking stop is a destination you'll need to reach to truly understand the nature of fear. The fluorescent lights of the downtown subway platform buzzed overhead as I descended the concrete steps at 11:47 p.m. My footsteps echoing in the nearly empty station. The smell of stale urine and industrial cleaner filled my nostrils as I waited for the Red Line train that would take me home to Queens after another grueling double shift at the hospital. Everything felt routine, normal, exactly what late-night public transit should be in New York City. That's when I heard it, a soft metallic scraping sound from somewhere deeper in the tunnel, like metal dragging against concrete. I glanced down the dark platform, but saw nothing except flickering emergency lights and the usual urban decay. Just the old subway system settling, I told myself, though something about that deliberate scraping made my skin crawl. As the train's headlight finally appeared in the tunnel, casting my shadow long across the platform, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me from the darkness beyond the station lights, studying my movements with predatory patience. My name is Maria Santos, and I'm a 28-year-old emergency room nurse who'd been working at Mount Sinai for 3 years. It was October 2023, and I just finished covering for a colleague's shift, leaving me exhausted and eager to get home to my studio apartment in Astoria. The late-night subway ride was part of my routine, usually crowded enough to feel safe, anonymous enough to decompress after dealing with trauma and crisis all day. But tonight felt different. The train that pulled into the station was nearly empty, which was unusual even for a weeknight. As I stepped into the car, I noticed only one other passenger, a man in his 40s sitting at the far end, wearing a dark jacket and staring straight ahead with unnatural stillness. The doors slid shut with their familiar pneumatic hiss, and we pulled away from the platform into the tunnel's darkness. I chose a seat about halfway down the car, close enough to the doors for a quick exit, but far enough from the stranger to maintain comfortable distance. That's when I noticed his reflection in the window across from me. He wasn't staring straight ahead anymore. He was watching me with the focused attention of someone studying a problem they needed to solve. The first suspicious sign came at the 59th Street station. Several people got on, filling some of the empty seats and creating the normal buffer of humanity I was used to. But as the train pulled away, I noticed the man had moved closer, now sitting maybe 6 seats behind me instead of at the far end of the car. When I glanced back directly, he was reading a newspaper, but I could see his eyes tracking my movement over the top of the pages. The newspaper was upside down. At Union Square, more passengers boarded, and I relaxed slightly in the crowd. But when I checked again, the man had moved even closer, now just 3 rows back. He'd abandoned the pretense of reading and was openly staring at me with an intensity that made my stomach clench. I pulled out my phone to text a friend, but there was no signal in the tunnel. The train's POS system crackled with static, then went silent. We were alone underground with a stranger who was clearly fixated on me, and I had no way to call for help. The train's rhythm began to change, slowing down between stations in a way that felt wrong. We should have been approaching Grand Central, but instead we seemed to be pulling into a platform I didn't recognize. Older, dimmer, with cracked tile walls that looked like they hadn't been maintained in decades. Next stop, storage track, the conductor's voice announced, but his tone was flat, mechanical, like he was reading from a script. Storage track? That wasn't a regular passenger stop. I looked around the car and realized with growing horror that all the other passengers had somehow disappeared without me noticing. It was just me and the man, and he was standing up, moving toward me with deliberate steps. The lights flickered and dimmed as the train shuddered to a complete stop. In the strobing emergency lighting, I could see his face clearly for the first time. Middle-aged, unremarkable, but his eyes held a cold calculation that made every instinct scream danger. "End of the line, Maria," he said, and the fact that he knew my name made my blood turn to ice. I lunged for the emergency call button, but he was faster, grabbing my wrist with surprising strength. "I wouldn't do that if I were you. We're not in service anymore." No one's listening. The doors hissed open onto the abandoned platform, and I could see this wasn't a regular subway station. The tiles were cracked and water-stained, and the platform stretched into darkness in both directions. Most terrifying, there were other figures moving in the shadows. People in transit worker uniforms who shouldn't have been there. You picked the perfect shift pattern, Maria. Every Tuesday and Friday, same train, same time. Very predictable for someone in your profession. His grip tightened on my wrist. "We've been watching you for weeks." That's when I realized this wasn't random. They'd been studying me, learning my routine, planning this abduction down to the smallest detail. The empty train car, the fake announcements, the abandoned platform. It was all orchestrated. "What do you want?" I managed to ask. "You have access to things we need. Hospital medications, medical supplies, patient information. There's a whole network of people willing to pay for what you can provide." He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Don't worry, we're not unreasonable. Cooperate, and you might even make it home eventually." I looked around desperately for any escape route. The train doors were still open, but the platform led nowhere. The figures in work uniforms were positioning themselves to block any exit routes. I was trapped underground with people who'd clearly done this before. But then I noticed something they'd overlooked. The emergency brake handle inside the train car. The one that would trigger automatic alerts to the transit control center. If I could reach it, it might bring real help. I pretended to stumble, pulling away from his grip just long enough to lunge for the brake handle. The train's alarm system erupted in ear-splitting shrieks, and emergency lights began flashing throughout the car. The man cursed and grabbed for me, but I was already moving, diving through the open doors onto the platform. The figures in uniforms were shouting, trying to coordinate their response to the unexpected alarm. I ran down the platform into the darkness, hoping to find a service tunnel or emergency exit. Behind me, I could hear them pursuing, their footsteps echoing off the cracked tile walls. That's when I saw it. A maintenance ladder leading up to what looked like a street-level access hatch. I climbed faster than I'd ever climbed in my life, my hands bleeding on the rusted metal rungs, emergency sirens wailing somewhere above. The hatch opened onto a deserted street in an industrial area of Queens I didn't recognize. Within minutes, transit police and NYPD units were responding to the emergency brake alarm, flooding the abandoned platform with officers and paramedics. They found evidence of the operation: modified train cars, fake uniforms, and documentation suggesting a network that had been abducting healthcare workers and forcing them to steal medical supplies for black market sales. But the people who'd grabbed me had vanished into the maze of service tunnels that honeycomb beneath New York City. The investigation revealed that at least 7 healthcare workers had gone missing over the past year, all of them nurses or pharmacy technicians with access to controlled substances. The fake subway stops were just one method the network used to isolate and abduct their targets. Marcus Webb, the man who'd grabbed me, was never caught. The others disappeared as completely as they'd appeared, probably using the same underground routes they'd used to set up their operation. I transferred to day shifts and started driving to work, but the experience left me hyper-aware of being watched, being studied, being selected as someone's target. Every stranger on the street became a potential threat, every routine a vulnerability that could be exploited. 3 months later, I received a MetroCard in the mail with no return address. It had exactly enough money loaded on it for one ride. On the back, someone had written in neat handwriting, "Your schedule is different now, Maria, but we're still watching. See you on the night shift." Because some predators never abandon their hunting grounds. They just adapt their methods, find new routes through the darkness, and wait for their targets to develop new patterns they can study and exploit. And somewhere beneath the streets of New York, in tunnels that don't appear on any official map, Marcus Webb is probably still running his modified trains, still collecting healthcare workers who thought they were just taking public transit home. The subway system has thousands of miles of abandoned tracks, forgotten platforms, and service areas that the public never sees. Perfect places to make people disappear. Perfect hunting grounds for predators who understand that the city's infrastructure can be weaponized against its own citizens. Next time you're alone on a late-night train and notice someone watching you a little too intently, remember that not every stop is on the official schedule, and not every passenger is planning to get off at their intended destination, because sometimes the last stop isn't where you thought you were going. It's where someone else has decided you need to be. The fluorescent lights in the subway car flickered with their familiar dying buzz, casting intermittent shadows across cracked vinyl seats as the downtown 6 train rumbled through Manhattan's underground arteries. I was slumped against the window, laptop bag heavy on my shoulder, counting the stops until I could finally collapse into bed. Another 16-hour day at the consulting firm, another late-night ride home to the Upper East Side. The car held maybe 6 other passengers, all absorbed in their phones or half asleep against the glass. That's when I heard it. A sharp metallic grinding sound from beneath the train, different from the usual wheel-on-track rhythm. It was deliberate, purposeful, like someone dragging a crowbar along the undercarriage. The sound persisted for several seconds before fading, only to return moments later, closer and more insistent. I pressed my face to the window, trying to peer into the tunnel darkness, but saw only the occasional flash of maintenance lights. The grinding came again, and this time, I felt the train shudder slightly. Was someone down there in the tunnels? And if so, what were they doing to the train? My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm a 29-year-old management consultant who's been riding the subway daily for 4 years. I know the system's quirks, the delays, the occasional weird smells, the homeless individuals who sometimes ride the cars for warmth. But this felt different, charged with an energy that made my skin crawl. The train began to slow, and I glanced up expecting to see 77th Street on the digital display. Instead, the screen flickered and went completely dark. The automated announcement crackled. Next stop, City Hall. My stomach dropped. City Hall station had been closed since the 1940s, sealed off and abandoned when they rerouted the line. I'd written a college paper on NYC's GO stations, and knew that platform was supposed to be inaccessible. The train shuddered to a stop with unusual violence, and the doors hissed open. Through the windows, I could see a dimly lit platform that looked nothing like the modern stations I knew. Cracked tile walls, flickering incandescent bulbs, and the thick smell of rust and stagnant water drifting into the car. The other passengers began filing out like sleepwalkers, their movements oddly coordinated and purposeful. I should have stayed on the train. But my laptop bag strap caught in the closing doors, and I was yanked forward onto the platform just as the train pulled away, leaving me stranded in this forgotten piece of the city's underground. The silence was absolute, except for the steady drip of water somewhere in the darkness. I pulled out my phone. No signal, which wasn't unusual underground, but this felt different, more isolated, more final. The platform stretched into shadows in both directions, and every surface was covered in graffiti that seemed to shift in the flickering light. But this wasn't random tagging. As my eyes adjusted, I realized the markings were territorial. Crude symbols, dates, and warnings scrawled in thick black paint. Mine, repeated over and over, trespassers die, and most unsettling, a detailed map of the subway system with certain stations circled in red, including this one. A soft footstep echoed from the far end of the platform. Then another. Someone was walking toward me with measured, deliberate steps, staying just beyond the reach of the flickering lights. I squinted into the darkness and made out a tall figure in tattered clothing, moving with predatory patience. "You're in my house now," a gravelly voice called out, echoing off the tile walls. "Been living down here 8 years, ever since they tried to put me away. This is my territory, my rules." The figure stepped into the light, revealing a gaunt man in his 50s with wild hair and clothes that looked like they hadn't been changed in months. His eyes held the flat, calculating look of someone who'd crossed lines most people never approach. In his hand, he carried a length of rebar, worn smooth from use. "Name's Tommy," he said conversationally, as if we were meeting at a coffee shop. "Used to work maintenance for the MTA before they fired me for disciplinary issues. But I know these tunnels better than anyone. know which trains stop here, which passengers get confused and step off at the wrong station. My blood turned to ice as I understood. This wasn't coincidence. He was deliberately causing trains to stop here, luring passengers into his underground domain. See, people disappear in the subway all the time, Tommy continued, slowly closing the distance between us. Accidents happen. Folks fall on the tracks, get lost in the tunnels. City doesn't look too hard when it's just another missing person report. I backed away, my heart hammering. I don't want any trouble. I'll leave right now. Too late for that. His smile revealed teeth that were broken and yellow. You've seen my setup. Know where I live. Can't have you telling people about my little operation down here. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing off the walls as I sprinted toward what I hoped was an exit. Behind me, I could hear Tommy's laughter, low and confident. He wasn't chasing me yet. He knew I had nowhere to go. The platform ended at a staircase leading up, but the gate at the top was chained shut with a heavy padlock. Another staircase led down into maintenance tunnels, but that would take me deeper into his territory. I was trapped in his underground maze. No point running, Tommy called out, his voice getting closer. I've got all the exits blocked. Been preparing this place for years, turning it into the perfect hunting ground. I spotted a service door, marked authorized personnel only, and threw my shoulder against it. Locked. But the frame was old. The wood rotted from decades of moisture. I kicked at it desperately, and on the third try, it splintered open. I found myself in a narrow maintenance corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. I could hear Tommy behind me, no longer patient, his footsteps pounding as he realized I'd found a way out of his trap. The corridor led to a ladder marked with warnings about electrical hazards. I climbed frantically, my hands slipping on the rusty rungs. Above me, I could see a faint outline of light around what looked like a manhole cover. Tommy's hand grabbed my ankle just as I reached the top. His grip was surprisingly strong, and I could smell his unwashed body, feel his desperation to keep his secret safe. I kicked downward with my free foot, connecting with his face. He cursed and lost his grip, falling back into the darkness. I pushed against the manhole cover with all my strength. It gave way suddenly, and I tumbled out onto a side street in lower Manhattan, gasping in the cold night air. I immediately called 911, my hands shaking as I tried to explain what had happened. The police investigation found extensive evidence of Tommy's operation. He'd been living in the abandoned station for years, using his knowledge of MTA systems to occasionally reroute trains to his platform. They discovered personal belongings from at least 12 missing persons, all tourists or late-night commuters who disappeared over the past 3 years. Tommy Reeves was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder, though he never confessed to the killings. The investigation revealed he'd been institutionalized twice for violent behavior, before finding his way into the subway tunnels, where he'd created his own twisted kingdom. The abandoned City Hall station was permanently sealed after the investigation, but the experience fundamentally changed how I see the subway system. Every unexpected delay, every flickering light, every homeless person in the tunnels makes me wonder what other predators might be lurking in the city's forgotten spaces. Because the most terrifying truth I learned is that beneath our feet, in the abandoned arteries of urban infrastructure, people like Tommy Reeves can disappear completely from society while still preying on it. They know our routines, our vulnerabilities, our trust in the systems that carry us through our daily lives. And sometimes, late at night when I'm riding the train home, I still hear that metallic grinding sound beneath the car, and I wonder how many other ghost stations are out there, and who else might be waiting in the darkness for the next passenger to get off at the wrong stop. The 1:15 a.m. Red Line train is a special kind of lonely. It's a metal tube rattling through the city's dark arteries, and its passengers are usually ghosts, night shift workers, students pulling all-nighters, people on the losing end of a long night out. I was one of those students, heading home to my tiny apartment after a brutal study session at the university library. The car was empty, except for me, and one other man sitting at the far end. He was nondescript, middle-aged, wearing a rumpled suit, his face pale and slick with a thin film of sweat under the harsh fluorescent lights. He kept glancing at the door connecting to the next car, his leg jiggling with a nervous, frantic energy. As we pulled out of the Washington Street station, plunging into the deep, rumbling darkness of the tunnel, the train began to slow. This was wrong. The next stop was miles away. With a final protesting screech of metal on metal, the train shuddered to a halt. The familiar hum of the engine died, replaced by a silence so profound it felt like pressure against my eardrums. Then, the intercom crackled to life, the operator's voice calm but unnaturally loud in the dead quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are being held momentarily due to an unspecified signal issue ahead. Please remain seated and calm. We should be moving again shortly." The man in the suit let out a small, choked sound. His head whipped around, his eyes wide and darting, scanning the empty car as if he expected to see something that wasn't there. He looked at me, and his expression wasn't just nervous anymore. It was pure, animal terror. My own heart began to pick up its pace. What did he know that I didn't? The minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic dripping of condensation from an overhead vent. The man in the suit had started muttering to himself, his words too low to understand, but the cadence was frantic, like a prayer. I tried to lose myself in my phone, but my eyes kept getting drawn back to him, to the raw panic radiating from him in palpable waves. He was watching the doors, not the doors to the outside, but the heavy metal doors connecting the subway cars. He watched them with the intensity of a man staring down the barrel of a gun. I couldn't help it. My own gaze drifted to the thick, grimy window of the connecting door, trying to see what he saw in the reflection of our own car. That's when the intercom crackled again. The operator's voice was different this time. The professional calm was gone, replaced by a thin, reedy tremor of fear. "Attention, passengers," he said, his voice straining. There is an unauthorized individual on the tracks. They are attempting to gain entry to the train. Please, stay away from the doors." I repeat, stay away from the doors. Before the operator had even finished his sentence, it began. A loud metallic bang echoed from the front of the train, traveling through the cars like a shockwave. Then another. Bang, bang. It was the sound of someone trying to force the doors, using their body or some heavy object. The man in the suit let out a strangled sob. He scrambled from his seat, pressing himself into the corner of the car, his eyes screwed shut. The lights flickered once, twice, and then plunged us into absolute, suffocating darkness. The operator's voice came back, no longer from the intercom, but from a handheld radio he must have been using. The sound tinny and distorted in the dark. "He's cut the power. He's on the train. Oh God, he's..." The transmission ended in a wet, static, choked scream. We were alone, trapped in a dead metal box deep beneath the city, with a killer, and he was coming for us. My mind, which had been frozen in a state of shock, finally snapped into action. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear. The sound of heavy footsteps moving slowly, deliberately, through the car ahead of us, and the sound of the connecting door handle being jiggled, tested. "We have to barricade the door," I hissed into the darkness, my voice a raw whisper. The man in the suit didn't respond. He was hyperventilating, lost in his own private hell. I was on my own. I ripped a long metal handrail from its fixtures. It came away with a screech of tortured metal, and wedged it through the handles of the connecting door. It was a flimsy defense, but it was something. The jiggling stopped. A moment of silence. Then, a fist hammered against the door, so hard the whole car seemed to shake. "I know you're in there, Arthur," a voice roared from the other side. It was a deep, guttural voice, filled with a chilling, possessive rage. "You can't hide from me forever." The man in the suit, Arthur, let out a terrified wail. This wasn't random. This wasn't random. This was personal, and I was caught in the middle of it. The pounding became more frantic. I knew the handrail wouldn't hold for long. I scrambled through the dark car, my hands searching for anything. A weapon, an escape route. My fingers found the emergency release lever for the side doors. It was a desperate, insane idea. The tracks were live, weren't they? But the power was out. Maybe it was my only chance. With a final, ear-splitting crack, the handrail snapped, and the connecting door flew open. I didn't wait to see the face of the man who stormed in. I yanked the emergency release lever. With a gasp of depressurizing air, the side door slid open, revealing the pitch-black maw of the subway tunnel. I threw myself out of the train and onto the gravel of the trackbed just as I heard Arthur scream, a sound that was cut off with a sickening final thud. I didn't look back. I just ran, stumbling through the oppressive darkness of the tunnel, guided only by the faint, distant glow of the next station. I ran until my lungs were on fire, until the sounds of the struggle faded behind me, until I burst out onto the empty platform, a ghost emerging from the underworld. The police investigation revealed a story more terrifying than I could have imagined. The attacker was a former business partner of Arthur's, a man he had cheated and ruined. For months, the man had been stalking Arthur, learning his routine, his late-night commute. He had planned the attack meticulously, using his knowledge as a former transit employee to disable the train and trap his victim. I was just an unforeseen complication, a witness he had intended to eliminate. They never found him. He vanished after that night, melting back into the city's shadows. Arthur's body was found in the silent, darkened train. I moved away. I try not to think about it. I take cabs now, but sometimes, when I'm walking past a subway entrance, I can feel the cool, stale air rising from the tunnels, and I swear I can hear the faint, distant echo of a man's scream. And last night, taped to my new apartment door, I found a used plastic subway token. Scratched into its surface were 2 words: next stop. The Blue Line subway car rocked gently as we descended into the tunnel beneath downtown Boston. The familiar rhythm of steel wheels on tracks creating a hypnotic backdrop to my evening commute. I sat in my usual spot near the middle doors, earbuds in, scrolling through work emails on my phone, while the mix of office workers and college students filled the seats around me. Everything felt normal, routine, exactly what rush hour public transit should be on a Thursday evening. That's when I heard it. A sharp metallic screech that cut through my music like fingernails on a chalkboard. The sound came from somewhere ahead of us in the tunnel, too harsh and sudden to be normal track noise. I pulled out one earbud and listened, but the sound had already faded into the train's ambient rumble. As I glanced around the car, I noticed a man in a dark trench coat sitting diagonally across from me. And something about his stillness made my skin crawl. While everyone else swayed naturally with the train's movement, he sat rigid, unnaturally motionless, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that felt predatory. My name is Jennifer Walsh, and I'm a 29-year-old financial analyst who'd been taking the Blue Line from downtown to my apartment in East Boston for 2 years. It was November 2023, and what should have been another routine commute home was about to become the most terrifying hour of my life. I'd noticed the man in the trench coat when I'd boarded at Government Center, mainly because he'd been standing on the platform longer than necessary, watching passengers as they got on and off different cars. He'd chosen to board the same car as me, despite having multiple other options, and had positioned himself where he could observe me without appearing obvious about it. The first suspicious sign came when I realized he wasn't doing anything. No phone, no book, no music. Just sitting there, watching people with the focused attention of someone conducting surveillance. His clothes were expensive but generic, the kind of outfit designed to be forgettable. But his eyes were sharp, calculating, taking in details about the passengers around him. When our eyes met briefly, he didn't look away like a normal person would. Instead, he smiled slightly, like we shared some private joke that I wasn't aware of yet. The train began to slow between stations, which was unusual for this time of day. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. Several passengers looked up from their phones, sensing something wasn't right about the change in rhythm. That's when the emergency brakes engaged. The sudden deceleration threw everyone forward violently. Coffee spilled, phones flew from hands, and a woman near the front let out a sharp cry as she slammed into the seat ahead of her. The lights went out completely for several seconds, plunging us into the tunnel's absolute darkness, before the emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in a hellish red glow. "Ladies and gentlemen," the conductor's voice crackled over the intercom. "We have a report of a suspicious package on board this train. For your safety, we are implementing emergency protocols. Please remain calm and stay in your seats." Panic rippled through the car immediately. People started talking loudly, some standing up despite the conductor's instructions, others pulling out phones to call family or post on social media. But I noticed the man in the trench coat hadn't moved at all. He was still watching me, and now his smile had grown wider. The doors remained locked, their mechanisms making frustrated clicking sounds as passengers tested them. We were trapped underground, maybe half a mile from the nearest station, with no way out except through the conductor's car or the emergency exit at the rear of the train. "This is a security alert," a different voice announced over the intercom, deeper, more authoritative than the conductor. "We need all passengers to remain seated while transit police conduct a car-by-car search. Anyone attempting to move between cars will be detained." But something about that announcement felt wrong. The voice was too calm, too controlled, like someone reading from a script. Real emergency announcements usually carried more urgency, more human emotion. I looked around the car and realized that several passengers who'd been there when we boarded were now missing. The businessman who'd sat near the front, the college student with the bright pink backpack, the elderly woman with the walker. All gone, as if they'd vanished into thin air. The man in the trench coat stood up slowly and began walking toward me, no longer pretending to be just another passenger. Other passengers were too focused on their own panic to notice his movement. But I could see the deliberate nature of his approach, the way his hand moved inside his coat like he was reaching for something. "Jennifer Walsh," he said quietly as he reached my row, his voice barely audible over the crowd's nervous chatter. "Financial analyst, lives alone on Bremen Street, takes the same train every day at 6:15 p.m. The fact that he knew my name and address made my blood freeze. This wasn't a random subway emergency. This was planned, coordinated, personal. "What do you want?" I whispered. "You have access to things we need. Client financial records, account passwords, investment portfolios." He sat down beside me, close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with something sharper, more chemical. "Your company handles some very high-profile accounts that certain people would pay significant money to access." I realized with growing horror that this wasn't terrorism or random violence. This was corporate espionage, and I'd been targeted specifically for the financial data I could access at my firm. "The suspicious package story is just cover," he continued. "Gives us time to have a proper conversation without interruption. Your cooperation would be appreciated." I looked around the car, hoping someone would notice what was happening, but the other passengers were absorbed in their own fear and confusion. The emergency lighting made everything look surreal, nightmarish, like we were trapped in some underground hell. "I can't access those systems from here," I said, trying to buy time. "Of course not, but you can access them tomorrow morning, and you can make copies of specific files we need." Or, he pulled his hand partially out of his coat, revealing what looked like the handle of a knife. "We can discuss alternative arrangements." That's when I noticed something he'd missed. My company laptop bag had an emergency GPS beacon built into the handle, required for all employees who handled sensitive data. If I could activate it without him noticing, it would send my location to company security and law enforcement. I pretended to fumble with my purse, panicking like the other passengers. While my thumb found the small button on my laptop bag, the beacon activated silently, and I could only hope it would work underground. "Smart girl," the man said, noticing my movement. "But that won't help you down here. We've got signal jammers running throughout this section of tunnel." But he was wrong. The beacon used a different frequency than cell phones, designed specifically for underground emergencies. Within minutes, I could hear different sirens approaching from above. Not just transit police, but FBI and corporate security responding to a potential data breach emergency. The man's confident expression began to crack as the sounds grew louder. "You activated something," he said, his voice losing its calm control. "GPS beacon," I replied. "Standard equipment for anyone with access to financial systems. My company knows exactly where I am and what kind of threat assessment to send." The other passengers were starting to notice our conversation, and several people had turned to watch. The man realized his cover was blown, but instead of retreating, he became more desperate. "Then we do this the hard way," he said, fully revealing the knife. But the cavalry was already arriving, the tunnel filled with the sound of multiple vehicles, and I could see flashlight beams approaching from both directions along the track. The emergency lighting suddenly returned to normal, and the train's doors hissed open. FBI agents and transit police flooded the car, shouting commands and quickly identifying threats. The man in the trench coat found himself surrounded by armed officers before he could use the knife, and within seconds, he was face down on the floor in handcuffs. As they led him away, I heard one of the agents radio back. "We've got Marcus Reed in custody," confirming this was a corporate espionage operation, not terrorism. The investigation revealed that Reed was part of a network that had been targeting financial sector employees for months, using fake subway emergencies to isolate and threaten them into cooperating with data theft. They'd successfully compromised at least 12 other companies before targeting mine. The suspicious package had been a dummy device designed to trigger emergency protocols, while accomplices had quietly removed selected passengers from the train before it stopped. If my GPS beacon hadn't worked, I would have disappeared into the same network of underground tunnels they'd been using to transport their victims. Wright was sentenced to 15 years for corporate espionage and kidnapping, but the investigation revealed that his network had been operating across multiple cities, using public transportation systems as hunting grounds for their targets. I changed my commute schedule and started taking different routes to work, but the experience left me hyperaware of being watched and studied. Every stranger on public transit became a potential threat. Every routine a vulnerability that could be exploited by people who turned the infrastructure of daily life into weapons against us. 6 months later, I received a letter forwarded through my company's security department. No return address postmarked from a federal prison. Inside was a single sentence. "Your new schedule is interesting, Jennifer. Random patterns are still patterns if you study them long enough. Because some predators never stop hunting. They just adapt their methods, find new ways to study their targets, and wait for the perfect opportunity to strike again." And somewhere, in the maze of tunnels beneath American cities, other networks are probably still operating, still using our trust in public systems against us, still turning routine commutes into carefully orchestrated traps. The next time your train stops unexpectedly and someone announces a security delay, look around carefully. Notice who's watching you a little too intently, who seems too calm in the chaos, who knows more about the situation than they should. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in an emergency isn't the one causing the panic. It's the one who's been planning for it all along.